The Constitution has a right to keep and bear arms. Does behavior change the interpretation of the Second Amendment, in your opinion as an attorney?
I think the Supreme Court has ruled, and more than once, that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right possessed by Americans.
So the ATF just suffered another major loss in the lawsuit which challenges their rule on frames and receivers, and this one may be headed to the Supreme Court once again. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think the ATF's rule on frames and receivers is clearly unconstitutional, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also, thank one of the supporters of the channel, which is TriStar Trading Co., my friend Johnny B. It's his company. They do a lot of merch for channels like mine and other channels. You can get my channel merch, and you can find the links down below in the description section, in the comment section. And you can get other shirts as well and other products like this Smoky Tyranny shirt, which a lot of you guys asked me about. So again, check them out, and you can check them out using the link down below. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing how the ATF just suffered another major loss in the Vanderstock v. Garland frames and receivers case. This is a lawsuit decided by Texas Federal District Court Judge Reed O'Connor. In this case, there were multiple plaintiffs, which included FPC, which were the original plaintiffs, and then also some intervener plaintiffs, which were Defense Distributed, and then also 80% Arms. Now, that fact is going to be really important for what just happened with a new injunction, a new emergency injunction that was just issued by Judge O'Connor. In this case, the original plaintiffs, FBC and Tactical Machining, sought preliminary injunctions to halt the enforcement of the ATF's new rule on frames and receivers, and essentially put a halt on it while it was making its way through the process. On review, Judge O'Connor granted a limited preliminary injunction against the ATF, which prevented the ATF from enforcing the rule against Tactical Machining and then also their customers. Now, after that, other companies that sold these types of products like Blackhawk Manufacturing, Defense Distributed, and then also 80% Arms sought to intervene in this case as new intervener plaintiffs. They asked the court to grant them the same type of limited protections that was just granted to a different company, which was Tactical Machining. Ultimately, the court did extend the protections to those new companies, so all these companies and their customers became protected by a preliminary injunction. After the preliminary injunction stage, FBC and the plaintiffs then sought to win the entire case by asking for a motion for summary judgment. And in response, Judge O'Connor did grant a motion for summary judgment and vacated the frames and receivers rule in its entirety, and that was a nationwide vacature. That was a huge win because the judge struck down the entire rule as invalid and found that the ATF should not be able to enforce it at all nationwide. Well, of course, the ATF was not going to let that summary judgment sit, so they filed an appeal up to the Fifth Circuit. Then the ATF also sought a stay from the courts so that they could still enforce the rule while the appeal was going at the Fifth Circuit level. However, Judge O'Connor and also the Fifth Circuit denied the ATF's request for a stay. That then led the ATF to go to the Supreme Court, and they sought for the Supreme Court to grant an emergency stay. They didn't get a stay from the Fifth Circuit or Judge O'Connor, so they asked the Supreme Court for a stay. That emergency application was submitted to Justice Alito, who then referred the request to the full court. And in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court agreed to stay the enforcement of the decision while the Fifth Circuit appeal was going on. The order of the Supreme Court stated that application for stay presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is granted. The June 30th, 2023 order and the July 5th, 2023 judgment of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas, insofar as they vacate the final rule of the ATF, are stayed pending the disposition of the appeal in the Fifth Circuit and disposition of a petition for a writ of certiorari if such a writ is timely sought. Should certiorari be denied, this stay shall terminate automatically. In the event certiorari is granted, the stay shall terminate upon the sending down of the judgment of this court. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Kavanaugh would deny the application for stay. So through that order, the Supreme Court allowed the ATF to continue to enforce the frames and receivers rule while the Fifth Circuit is reviewing the motion for summary judgment on appeal. Now, again, that was important too because we saw the Supreme Court have a 5-4 decision where you saw Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett join the liberals in granting the ATF stay, which was also very significant. I also want to note that the oral arguments recently took place in the Fifth Circuit on this case, in this Vanderstock case. My impression from the Fifth Circuit panel is that they will rule against the ATF. The judges were very critical of the ATF's frames and receivers rule, and many times the ATF's attorneys struggled to justify why this rule was consistent with the federal laws. So we're still waiting to see what the Fifth Circuit panel will decide. We've had oral arguments, and now we're just waiting for a decision on whether the granting of the summary judgment was appropriate or not. But remember how I said there were two groups of plaintiffs in this case, the original FBC plaintiffs and then the later intervener plaintiffs, which were Defense Distributed and 80% Arms? Well, while all this other stuff was going on, 80% Arms and Defense Distributed also filed and sought an emergency motion for a preliminary injunction. So what they did is they went back to Judge O'Connor. They said because of what the Supreme Court just said with their stay, because of this appeal at the Fifth Circuit level, we need an emergency injunction to be put back in place, which at least maintains the status quo of protections that we had before through that preliminary injunction that he had already granted, which protects their company and then also their customers. The argument is that when the ATF went to the Supreme Court for a stay and received a stay, that was only on the summary judgment decision and the vacatur. That did not impact the prior preliminary injunctions that O'Connor had already granted, and he still has the authority to extend emergency preliminary injunction protections to these companies and also their customers. And Judge O'Connor on review agreed and granted a preliminary injunction protecting the company and the customers. Judge O'Connor in his order stated that having considered the arguments, evidence, and applicable law, the court holds that it has ancillary jurisdiction to enforce in equity the portions of its summary judgment order and final judgment that remain in effect following the stay order of the Supreme Court of the United States. The court also holds that the relevant factors weigh in favor of granting injunctive relief to intervener plaintiffs. The proper scope of the relief is that which mirrors the relief previously granted to intervener plaintiffs at the preliminary injunction stage, plus an extended effective period that mirrors the expiration table of the stay order by the Supreme Court of the United States on August 8th, 2023. So Judge O'Connor just granted an emergency preliminary injunction that puts back in place the prior injunctions that he had issued to the individual companies like Defense Distributed and 80% Arms. It's going to protect those companies and then also their customers. The ATF argued against this by saying that the Supreme Court stay that was just issued in August prevents Judge O'Connor from halting any portion of this rule. However, Judge O'Connor in his ruling disagreed. He found that he can still issue injunctions that protect individual plaintiffs since what the Supreme Court stayed was an impact of any nationwide vacatur of the rule. So he said that he still has authority to protect these companies and individual plaintiffs and then the customers. Now, I know this is a lot of procedural battles, but it's very important. The punchline of all this is that even with the Supreme Court issuing a stay, Judge O'Connor has issued a new emergency injunction, which in effect puts back in place his prior protections for specific companies and then also their customers. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that very soon the ATF will seek a halt by the Fifth Circuit, will seek some sort of stay, and then maybe even go up to the Supreme Court. But what Judge O'Connor is trying to do is at least keep things the way that they were before the Supreme Court ultimately stepped in and granted that stay. So where does this leave us? Well, the Fifth Circuit has heard arguments in front of them actually last week, and that was on the motion for summary judgment of whether or not the granting of the summary judgment by Judge O'Connor was appropriate or not. That is one of the main things that we will be looking forward to and we need a decision on. In the meantime, there was another battle going on in front of Judge O'Connor. He has, in fact, granted an emergency preliminary injunction to protect the companies and then also their customers from what the ATF is trying to do with their rule. He has found that he can do that despite what the stay of the Supreme Court said, and he said that the Supreme Court had issued a stay, but it doesn't impact his ability to give individual relief to these plaintiffs. And again, no doubt in my mind, the ATF will ask for the Fifth Circuit and maybe even the Supreme Court to override what he just did. So this is going to be a very important battle in a very dynamic situation going forward. By the time I even post this, something could have changed and the ATF probably is seeking some sort of review by the Fifth Circuit. So make sure you stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you hit the bell icon and click on all notifications so you're getting this information as it develops because it's impacting your right to keep and bear arms. But if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.